This is the R. Hardy Matheson Preserve, an 800-acre tract of land in the southern end of Coral Gables, Florida. Sitting just inside, practically buried under overgrown trees and brush, is a structure shrouded in mystery. A sunken, military-style bunker with origins tracing back to a stranger-than-fiction covert CIA operation in the 1960s to overthrow then-Cuban President Fidel Castro. Hi, I'm Adam Yogel. Join us today as we explore this clandestine building, whose actual purpose still remains a mystery to this very day. Cuba, 1959. Fidel Castro rises to power after leading a revolution to overthrow then-Cuban President Fulgencio Batista. The U.S. response? Operation Mongoose, also known as the Cuban Project. Commissioned in 1960 and a prime focus of the Kennedy administration, this covert mission was executed by the U.S. military and the Central Intelligence Agency, and initially aimed at overthrowing Castro by fighting a propaganda war. By enlisting a number of Cuban exiles, Operation Mongoose would send these exiles back behind enemy lines to attempt to change the public perception of Castro, hoping for an eventual overthrow of the new communist government by the Cuban people themselves. As tensions between the U.S. and Cuba grew, military responses on both sides escalated. With the arrival of Soviet nuclear warheads in Cuba, the infamous Cuban Missile Crisis was born. In preparation for this eventuality, and to create a more cohesive network for Operation Mongoose, a vast series of military installations were placed all over Miami. We know the bunker in Coral Gables was part of that network, but what part did it play in the overall mission? And what went on inside? To try and get some answers, I joined local journalist Jesse Schechner, who has been investigating this mysterious structure and recently published an article sharing some of his discoveries to explore the building, whose purpose still remains unknown. We know this was part, at least according to your article and a lot of the research I've done, that this was, we can safely say, a military structure.
Oh, for sure.
And it was part of this Operation Mongoose.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, Operation Mongoose was a concerted effort by the United States Army and the CIA, and I'm sure a number of other military organizations, to stifle the ballistic and nuclear armament of Cuba during the Cold War.
Wow. It
was constructed right around 1962.
Wow.
And as you can see, it's held up remarkably well.
Wow, and here it is. Although Jesse is confident the structure was part of Operation Mongoose, even he is unsure of what part it actually played. He explains that his conversation with a local military expert might reveal one possible theory.
So Anthony Atwood, the executive director of the Miami Military Museum, who studied this subject and many others, his educated guess was that this was an observation station which would alert some dozen missile silos located throughout Miami-Dade County and Monroe County in the event of a ballistic missile attack by Cuba against the United States, empowered by the Soviet Union, who at the time had begun arming them as part of the Cold War.
Interesting. But again, he isn't exactly, he can't say for certain that's what it was.
No one's been able to say for certain.
It's hard to imagine an operations station for monitoring missile activity in a suburban area like Coral Gables today, but structures like these were a harsh reality of the time. Given Miami's proximity to Cuba, missile monitoring stations in the area gave the U.S. a strategic advantage, and the location of this particular structure, along with certain design elements, seems to suggest it was just that.
Yeah, we're within maybe a 10 to 15 minute walk from hitting Biscayne if we continue to go in that direction there. Atwood, the director of the Miami Military Museum, put it pretty much as succinctly as I could ever hope that it could be put, which was that it would give downtown Miami about 2 to 3 minutes warning, 2 to 3 minutes head time of what was coming their way, at which point perhaps some surface-to-air missiles might have been able to act in opposition of it. Well, Atwood pointed to the size of the windows. And the windows are a really interesting part of this because fallout shelters, bomb shelters, bunkers typically tend to be not only very strong in their construction, but very insulated. And without the kind of blocking any sort of impact or anything that happens from that. The fact that there are these enormous windows surrounding the entire thing in every direction makes it, kind of emphasizes the idea that this structure was meant to look out. And so that's why, another reason why the educated hypothesis is that its purpose was for observational means.
In addition to the openings that would be necessary for large, impact-resistant windows, Jesse points out some other unique characteristics of the structure that adds to the theory of this being a missile monitoring station. Characteristics such as an opening that most likely housed a large, impact-resistant door, an intricate network of wires that could have powered an advanced communication center, and an obvious second floor, while flooded and inaccessible today, at the time may have housed a cluster of monitoring equipment that could identify any incoming threat to the U.S. mainland. Although the evidence is strong, questions still remain. When you think of bunkers, you think of them buried underground. You don't think of windows.
Yeah, certainly not. Certainly not. And I'm not altogether sure how long this particular road, Old Cutler, was, but you'd think that it would be a little more distant from the main road if it were to be something that would its entire intention was to go unfettered by the public. Where this is, again, as we just saw, it's not very far off, which again adds to the mystery too, because why didn't they place it closer to the edge of the water? I mean, that is a good question too, right?
Why isn't it higher up off the ground too?
Yeah.
If they're looking out.
Yes, there's, it's very strange.
Without answers to questions like these, along with the absence of any official documentation about the structure, it's hard to say with any absolute certainty that this was a missile monitoring station. But given its location, structural capability, and the opinion of a local military expert, we can make an educated guess that this was a facility for monitoring missile activity during a time when all of the United States, especially South Florida, was on constant alert. But perhaps more important is what it is today, which is what Jesse describes as a point of cultural convergence, a testimony to the history of its surrounding community.
What makes this place so special and so fascinating is the number of layers of history that exist here. This place is built on bones. 2,000-year-old Tequesta Indian tribe and burial ground resided right where this structure sits now. And then on top of it, now a Cold War relic, whose origin still is undetermined. And between the 70s and today, it became a point of convergence for local teens and youth and paintballers. And as you can see, it's now covered in graffiti as it's been for several decades. And every few years, it's covered over again.
Abandoned military relics like this one raise more questions than they do answers. The Coral Gables bunker reminds us of a time that shaped the history and culture of South Florida as a whole. Although we know it was part of a military response to growing tensions between the U.S. and Cuba, as of now, the bunker's true purpose still remains a mystery. This is Adam Yogel for Coral Gables Television.